People of Earth, attention.
What you're observing may well be the beginning of the end.
You're twice as heavy as you were on Mars.
Give me your widest beam.
These things take over a man's mind. He becomes a robot.
In my case, sir, the question is totally without meaning.
Step into the future, a half-century from today.
Is this the end of our civilization?
The Martians can conquer the Earth in 6 days.
The same number of days it took to create it.
Klaatu, Barada, Nikto. We must remember those words.
Initiating Episode 1. It came from outer space.
Oh, this stupid... Oh, wait, it's working. It's working. It's working. Hello.
Homo sapiens and Neanderthals alike. I'm Dan Gale, broadcasting to you from my tiny space capsule in the S Galaxy. That's Somerset. And welcome to the first episode of It Watched from Outer Space. You are the privileged few, testing the waters of this podcast experiment, pushing forward the boundaries of tolerance in science, entertainment, and probably patience, before the rest of the guinea pigs known as the other Earthlings get their filthy ears around it. And I thank you for your attendance. You are the bravest, most foolish, and the very sexiest guinea pigs I've ever seen. And let me tell you, I've been to Straw Hatch 7 on the Rodanti system. Hot furry rodents. So, is this going out live? I can't edit it then. I have to read this first. Please do not disclose any of the information you are to be exposed to in the next half an hour or so, unless it is accompanied by positive hashtags and promises to subscribe via your podcatcher of choice to future episodes. I've been to the future, and let me tell you, you are in for a treat. Each episode, I hope to guide you through a pretty much randomly assigned mini cluster of themed science fiction films, one at a time. My aim isn't so much to point and laugh at the chosen film as it flounders naked in the glaring light of our cynical modern eyes, more study it, dissect it carefully, pulling back its soft, fleshy internal tissue flaps with my tongs and exposing the moist, pulsating brain within. Basically, we're going to be talking about some odd films. I suggest downloading the mini-episode entitled Episode 0 for a better explanation of what you're about to suffer. Right, enough flim-flam. Last time I promised we'd be diving headfirst into the films of Jack Arnold. So, hang on, let me get a better signal. Okay, let me just call up his file here. Jack Nicholas, Jack Torrance, Jack O'Lantern, Jack your body, Jack Arnold, here he is. Okay, 3 interesting facts about Jack Arnold. He was born Jack Arnold Wax, W-A-K-S, in Connecticut, USA in 1916 on a kitchen table to Russian immigrant parents. That's pretty random. He directed an Oscar-nominated documentary, and he had a prosthetic leg. Yeah, that'll do. He worked as an actor and a vaudeville dancer. A shortage of planes during World War II meant that he was forced to wait to become a pilot, so instead he became a documentary filmmaker in the Signal Corps, assigned as an assistant to documentarian Robert Flaherty, who taught him the basics of filmmaking. After the war, he set up his own documentary company, making fundraising films with titles such as Beechwood Package Home and Chicken of Tomorrow. He then made With These Hands in 1950 about a cloak maker looking back on his life, a parable about the history of American industry, which starred a young Joseph Wiseman, 12 years before he played Dr. No in the first James Bond film. With these hands earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Documentary Feature, which helped Arnold to gain his first movie proper as director. Arnold worked in various genres of movies over a 30-year career. Dramas like The Lady Takes a Flyer, comedies, the Peter Sellers movie The Mouse That Roared, teen rock and roll exploitation like High School Confidential, and even a nudie sex comedy, The Bunny Caper. Hey, look, some very interesting directors had made sex comedies. Val Guest, who had initially made the first Hammer horror movie, The Quatermass Experiment, did go on to make Zeta 1, about a lot of nude aliens. And Martin Campbell, who did Eskimo Nell, also went on to direct GoldenEye and Casino Royale. So no smirking at the back, thank you. Two genres that Jack Arnold came back to again and again were westerns and sci-fi. He made westerns with Orson Welles, Rory Calhoun, and Lex Barker. But he had been a fan of pulp science fiction periodicals as a child and was very enthusiastic about the idea of moving into science fiction cinema. His sci-fi filmography features some pretty heavy hitters. It Came from Outer Space, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and its first sequel, Revenge of the Creature, Tarantula, The Incredible Shrinking Man, uncredited reshoots to the end of This Island Earth, The Space Children, and Monster on the Campus, most of which had subtle social or political hidden meanings within their stories, the inclusion of which was sometimes Arnold's own doing, which in a time in Hollywood where you could be put on trial for seemingly trying to influence audiences with hidden propaganda, was a risky thing to be doing. But he liked to get his audiences to think. Although appreciated and successful at the time, the science fiction films of Jack Arnold came and went pretty much as films of that genre did back then, popping up again on TV some years later and helping a generation of monster kids fall in love with his movies, their themes and their bogeymen. But it wasn't until the end of his career that his films started to get the critical recognition they actually deserved. By the mid-70s, he had seen several science fiction films cancel on him because of studio executives' fears over his health. One of these was going to be an elaborate version of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, filmed in England. And in the early 1980s, his idea for directing a remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon was put aside so Universal could make Jaws 3D instead. Arnold proved the studios wrong about his abilities by moving comfortably into directing mainstream TV shows, notching up episodes of Wonder Woman, Rawhide, Gilligan's Island, Buck Rogers and The Bionic Woman. Books were suddenly being written about him. His films had become their own mini-genre of science fiction. He was interviewed in 1975 for the film magazine Ciné Fantastique and was happy people were finally getting what he was trying to do. If you buy the German Blu-rays of his science fiction films, you can be treated to title-relevant extracts of a filmed interview that Arnold gave in 1983. These are fascinating to watch, and it gave an insight into the sort of ideas that he may have come up with if he had been allowed to continue making projects at the same peak level he was making them when he started out.
I'd like to do another comedy, like The Mouse That Roared. And I'd like to do some more science fiction films. And I'll keep working until the last day.
Books have been written about Arnold and his films. Dana M. Reeves wrote Directed by Jack Arnold, and the seemingly ever-typing Tom Weaver interviewed him for one of his books. Now, Tom Weaver has written many books with titles like Earth versus the Sci-Fi Filmmakers, Return of the B Science Fiction Film and Horror Heroes, It Came from Horrorwood, I Talked with a Zombie. If there's anything you want to learn about the genre that I'm attempting to cover in greater detail, after listening to this nonsense, I suggest you press stop and go and buy one of his books. By the 80s, Jack Arnold had been plagued with ill health. He had lost a leg to cancer and had had 3 kidney stone operations, as well as developing the beginning of Parkinson's disease. Jack Arnold passed away in 1992. I'm pleased to be able to say I appreciated him during his lifetime, but I'm even happier to know that he was aware of how cherished his movies were.
Well, I'm flattered indeed. I just did the best I could, and they turned out well, and people liked them. But certainly I had no idea that we'd be talking about them 20 years afterwards or more.
Right then. First up is probably one of the most loved and influential science fiction movies of all time. I just hope I'm not setting the bar too high for later episodes. I've got to be equally as enthusiastic about They Saved Hitler's Brain. Aliens Amongst Us type films usually take on one of two formats. The first, the spaceships arrive, and through intent or misunderstanding, they begin to annihilate cities in an attempt to take over our planet. Think of War of the Worlds, or Earth versus the Flying Saucers, or a TV show like V, for example. The second scenario has the alien or aliens arriving, and they keep a low profile, hoping to secretly achieve their goal whilst hidden within society, spreading paranoia and distrust, as in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or The Day the Earth Stood Still, or TV's The Invaders. Often the latter technique was employed because it's much cheaper to show a man with a crooked little finger suggesting he's an alien than it is to build and destroy models of entire cities. One of the very first films to employ this hidden alien device wasn't so frugal and spent a lot on a spectacular, visually impressive, and yet quiet invasion. People of Earth, I give you 1953's It Came from Outer Space, the first 3D science fiction film, and the first in our Jack Arnold triple bill.
Ladies and gentlemen, the events that I'm about to describe are going to sound incredible to most people, but I know they happened. I saw them happen. They happened to me.
This film set up several iconic elements that were used repeatedly in later science fiction films. Aside from the use of 3D, the creepy atmosphere, the black and white photography, there was also the American desert setting used in films like Them or The Monolith Monsters. The seemingly paranoid hero and the disbelieving local police, as in The Blob. The mystery of what's causing the carnage, like in Tarantula or Tremors. And the now very familiar aforementioned telltale signs that the people you knew and loved are no longer who they once were. This was also used to devastating effect later the same year in The Amazing Invaders from Mars. Right, American Movie Lesson 102. Why are things filmed in Hollywood? Well, Hollywood, California is sunny, so filming outside means good weather and lots of light. It's as simple as that, really. Deserts surround California, and it's obviously much cheaper to film nearby the studio than to fly a crew and equipment further away, hence why so many westerns and science fiction films were set in deserts and canyons around the West Coast. Television had an unquenchable thirst for content in its first 2 decades, again, hence why there were so many western shows springing up in the 1950s. And after a bit, you start to recognise the same actors appearing in them time and again. But better still, you get to recognise the same locations. Desert locations are cheap, but they're also very eerie.
Here, listen. You hear it?
Yeah. Any idea what it is?
I don't know. Might be somebody up that way tapping the wires, or back that way listening to us like we're listening to him.
I wonder who it is.
I don't know. After you've been working out on the desert 15 years like I have, hear a lot of things. See a lot of things, too. Sun in the sky and the heat. All that sand out there with the rivers and lakes that aren't real at all. And sometimes you think that the wind gets in the wires and hums and listens and talks. Just like what we're hearing now. Still hear it?
No, it's gone.
Well, that's the way it is. Comes and goes.
In this clip from an interview from 1983, Jack Arnold himself explains why he loved filming in the desert so much.
It's very mysterioso. It has an atmosphere, and it has a strange feeling, the desert does. And I felt that was a great background for telling a story that you're asking an audience to suspend belief. You want them to believe a bizarre thing. So it helps to put them in an atmosphere where it's bizarre already. It's naturally bizarre. But locations, I've always been careful in the locations I pick, because I think they're an integral part of the storytelling, and especially if the story is bizarre.
It Came from Outer Space was essentially written by famed science fiction author Ray Bradbury. I say essentially because at the time he wasn't that well known. His reputation had just started to gain some weight with the publication of his stories The Martian Chronicles, The Illustrated Man, and Fahrenheit 451. His idea was quite simple. Aliens crash land on Earth and try to figure out how to take off again without causing a fuss. Bradbury's original treatment for It Came from Outer Space was split into two distinct flavours. At the studio's insistence, he wrote a version where the aliens were nasty, as well as his original concept, where they were no friendlier or nastier than any humans would be in the same situation. They just wanted to go home. The studio went for the latter treatment, much to Bradbury's delight, and he kept writing until he had nailed the story. His treatments were so detailed, they even contained extended bits of dialogue for the characters to say. Now, a treatment is usually just the story, and the actual screenplay, sometimes written by someone else, fleshes that treatment out into far greater detail, featuring all the dialogue and the sound effects, the actions, the props, and sometimes even camera angles. What Bradbury had delivered in his naive eagerness was a treatment so detailed it was essentially a completed screenplay. Enter screenwriter Harry Essex. According to film historian Tom Weaver on the film's commentary track and Bill Warren in the book Keep Watching the Skies, Essex took Bradbury's treatment and, to all intents and purposes, crossed Bradbury's name out and replaced it with his own, and then handed it in, finished, thereby ensuring he'd get a lot of the credit for someone else's work. The full, rather unscrupulous story about Harry Essex and Ray Bradbury and the writing of this film is available in full on the film's audio commentary track. Essex does not come out of it looking like a very nice person. But that's the cutthroat world of Hollywood, baby. Luckily, despite his thunder being stolen somewhat, Bradbury's career continued to soar. The career of Harry Essex did not. The film starts with a scientist and his fiancée witnessing a meteorite crash near the town of Sand Rock in the Mojave Desert. On closer inspection, the scientist, John Putnam, played by Richard Carlson, sees that it's not a meteorite at all, but a large alien spaceship, its door wide open. The inhabitants have escaped. The ship is then buried under a landslide, and nobody believes what Putnam saw. And yet, as locals start to vanish and then reappear again acting strangely, a distinct paranoia starts to settle onto the tiny town of Sandrock. Maybe that city boy Putnam was telling the truth.
I know what you're thinking, Matt, but you've got to believe that what you saw today was only what looked like Frank and George.
They didn't by any chance tell you what they wanted.
They want us to trust them, to believe that Frank and George are in no danger as long as we don't interfere with them, to give them time.
Did it ever occur to you that you might be gambling with their lives?
Yeah, what do you think you were doing when you refused to believe me?
Frank and George. That's crazy.
I tell you, I came face to face with them.
But how could they take over anyone else's form? And where's the real Frank and George?
I don't know.
And why would they want to do that? Why?
Maybe to move about freely, to come into town without being stopped.
So they steal a telephone truck, something that'll stick out like a torch. Now, does that make sense?
This film is an intriguing basic form of the sci-fi setup that we would come to see many times in later films, and it's hard for me to imagine seeing all these familiar tropes appearing on screen for the first time. Richard Carlson as a scientist, check. Moody desert shots, check. Theremin on the soundtrack, check. People acting robotic and weird? Check. Point of view shots of the alien as they attack? Check. A shot of an owl doing a backflip on a log? Check. Yeah, you've got to see the film to understand that one. It's been said by many who have seen this film in its original 3D form that the stereo vision is so effective that it adds an extra layer of creativity to the movie. Coat hangers in a cupboard threaten to poke your eyes out. Falling rocks look like they really are falling on top of you. Even a telescope on a tripod being swung around menaces the taller members of the cinema audience. Not having seen it in 3D, I'm just going to have to take everyone's word for it. The current Blu-ray from Universal features both the 3D and 2D versions, so I do technically own it. However, you need to have a 3D Blu-ray player and a 3D television as well to view it in 3 dimensions, and, well, this space capsule is only so big. In a 1975 interview with Cinefantastique magazine, Jack Arnold said, "We made It Came From Outer Space in 3D, I suppose, because Warner's had just made House of Wax, which was a huge hit, and it was a new fad. Universal wanted something to compete with it. They felt a science fiction film would be the perfect vehicle for a 3D film. It was a pain in the neck, technically. Although it may have tested his patience, he made 4 3D films in the early 50s. This, the first 2 Black Lagoon films, and a thriller called The Glass Web, starring Edward G. Robinson. And he later noted that he was aware that It Came From Outer Space had started the renaissance at Universal for more monster-led science fiction films. Although I personally think Arnold made better films later on, I really enjoyed this film. The aliens that nearly everyone involved in the film thought either stayed on screen too long or should never have been seen in the first place look pretty cool. They were referred to by the production staff as globs, 12-foot tall, floating, one-eyed, ethereal space slugs that leave a trail of glitter behind them. Also, that special effect of the meteorite crashing into the camera is so cool, they play it twice in the opening 5 minutes of the film to get their money's worth out of it. It must be a hell of an opener in 3D. Ultra nerdy side note, as if this entire podcast wasn't an ultra nerdy side note, here's another one. Another first for this film is this sound effect, one of the earliest times I've heard it in any film. Now that explosion sound effect is, for productions made at Universal, the explosion equivalent of the Wilhelm scream. Or the castle thunderclap. Sound effects that have been used and reused in other films and television shows over the years ad nauseum, to the point where they've just become complete cliches. The explosion sound, which was used in It Came From Outer Space, got overused to the point of absurdity in later 70s TV shows like Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica. It's like it was the only sound effect they had. Once your brain tunes into these sounds, you can't help but hear them everywhere. Sometimes even when the films aren't playing, which is worrying. One particular highlight for me in this film is essentially an invisible special effect. You're not meant to notice it, but when you do, it amazes rather than spoils the film. As you probably know, filming in locations like a desert can be a nightmare. The heat, the snakes, the damn prairie dog burrows, plus the fact you have to move all the equipment that's happily in the studio out on location. These problems double when you're filming at night, as you have to bring in generators for the lights, beds for the crew members and their families, more catering trucks, you've got bigger, more dangerous animals coming out of the desert, the insurance goes up, the unsociable hours of the wages is spiraling out of control. It's just easier to build a desert in the safety of the studio and film it at whatever time of day you want. And that is exactly what Jack Arnold did with his art directors Bernard Hersbrunn and Robert Boyle. They created a stretch of desert highway in Studio 12 at Universal that is so realistic you'd never know it wasn't a real desert road if you hadn't been told. Even more incredible is the forced perspective as the desert road, painted along the floor and then up the curved join of the floor to the wall, like something Wile E. Coyote would have used in the Roadrunner cartoons, disappears into the horizon. It's flanked by increasingly smaller model telegraph poles and wires that converge in the distance, and there's even a miniature car with working headlights that they momentarily place on the road painting on the wall to suggest a vehicle way off into the distance, just to seal the illusion. It's very clever stuff, and yet you're not meant to notice it. The sneaky subtext that Arnold peppered throughout his later sci-fi films is evident here. In Cinefantastique, Arnold discussed the true monsters of the film. I had one brief cut, about a foot of film, that showed the aliens, but I knew there was nothing that supplied what the imagination would think was there. No matter how horrendous, scary or bizarre you wanted something to be, you couldn't duplicate what an audience would imagine the creature to be. Finally, I used the cut in a flash, just once, which is really a departure from most of the films of that period, which featured the alien and made it the focal point of the story. My focal point was what happened to the people, not what happened to the alien, who landed inadvertently on Earth because he ran into trouble. I concentrated on our innate repulsion, hatred, and paranoid fear of anything different from us. Good or bad, if it's different, we're afraid of it, and we hate it. He continued, "You can trace the roots of this down to the primitive tribes, one against the other. In the cities, to this block against the next block, or the Jew against the Arab, or the Protestant against the Catholic, the black against the white. We've not progressed as human beings to differentiate between what is superficial and what is not. Of course, the sooner we learn this lesson, the better off we'll all be, and that's what I tried to point out in my science fiction films, in a manner in which an audience would accept it. I don't think they would accept a polemic. They'd walk out on it, or it would be under investigation by the House of Un-American Activities Committee or some such animal. My objective was primarily to entertain, but I also wanted to say something. And if 10% of the audience grasped that, I was very successful. Like a lot of these influential science fiction films from the 50s and 60s, there was a remake of this, a couple of decades later. Joining David Cronenberg's The Fly, Chuck Russell's The Blob, and Tobe Hooper's Invaders from Mars, was Roger Downey's It Came from Outer Space 2. Not a sequel so much as a remake with all the story elements of the original, including the desert locations and the paranoia and the mostly benevolent aliens, only remade as a very slow 1996 TV movie with early, terrible CGI. It appears that Universal, enthused by the success of the Tremors TV movie sequels, went back to the original metaphorical desert sci-fi movie mineshaft to see if they could extract a bit more gold from it. I'd love to say it's worth tracking down, but it isn't. It stars Brian Kerwin, the guy from King Kong Lives, which is about the most interesting thing I can say about it. The Blu-ray I saw of It Came from Outer Space was the Region B from Universal, which appears to be the standard one released throughout the world. Your world, I mean. The extras are Universal Monsters expert Tom Weaver's highly researched commentary track, a trailer, and a 30-minute documentary culled from the DVD about the making of this film, entitled The Universe According to Universal. Plus you get the film in 2D and 3D. And, intriguingly, it has its original 3-track stereo sound, which is pretty rare for a film of this age. The print is nearly perfect, although those of you like me suffering from aspect ratio nerditis might be interested to note that both Bill Warren in Keep Watching the Skies and Tom Weaver in the commentary track both mention that this film was one of the earliest to be released in 3D and the 1.185 widescreen aspect ratio, and yet the Blu-ray is 4:3 open matte. God, So listen to me. If you can get over this frankly jaw-dropping fact, then you'll have plenty to enjoy. And by jaw-dropping, I mean essentially irrelevant. I know aspect ratios are important. In this instance, I don't think it is. Richard Carlson, the star of this show, went on to be quite a familiar face in early 1950s American sci-fi, mostly because of this and The Creature from the Black Lagoon. He appeared in The Maze, The Magnetic Monster, and even starred and co-directed Riders to the Stars in 1954. He's not the most charismatic of leads, but he's a cosy presence, a likeable, non-nerdy professor type who still wears a blazer, a sweater and a tie even in the heat of the Mojave Desert. But unlike a lot of university lecturers in movies, he is fully aware of what a woman looks like, and his fiancée Ellen, played by Barbara Rush, has an important role to play in the film's story. You're on his side the whole way through, and that adds to the character's appeal, as you want to get to the bottom of the mystery as much as he does. So, not my personal favourite of Arnold's sci-fi films, but pioneering, highly influential, a massive hit, and a great place to start if you're a vintage science fiction newbie. But then if you were, why on earth would you be listening to this? So yes, our first film, It Came From Outer Space, is highly recommended, as is this week's audio adventure, originally aired on X-1, the 1950s sci-fi radio drama in the United States. And this week's episode is a cracker from 1955, entitled The Veldt. And like our film this week, it's also from a story by Ray Bradbury. It had been recorded for Dimension X, the sister radio series, a few years earlier, and although this version is a little shorter, the sound quality of this later one is much better. So, here it is.
Countdown for blast off. X-5, 4, 3, 2, X-1, fire. From the far horizons of the unknown come transcribed tales of new dimensions in time and space. These are stories of the future, adventures in which you'll live in 1,000,000 could-be years on 1,000 maybe worlds. The National Broadcasting Company, in cooperation with Street and Smith, publishers of astounding science fiction, presents X-1. Tonight's story, Ray Bradbury's tale, The Veldt.
This is the office of Dr. David McLean, resident psychiatrist of the new Chicago Institute of Human Engineering.
All right, Miss Carver, will you take this, please? To Charles S. Haworth, senior psychiatrist, New Chicago Institute of Human Engineering. The following constitutes my report on the case of George and Lydia Abbott, which we discussed by telephone. Subject George relates onset of symptoms to the purchase of a $60,000 soundproofed Happy Life home. Under narcosynthesis during initial interviews, subject described the experience in the following manner. Miss Carver, would you play back the sonic record of the initial interview?
We'd always wanted one, and then we could afford it, so...
Go on, Mr. Abbott. Tell me about the home.
The home? Well, it was supposed to do everything, the agent told us. And it did, I guess. It clothed us, fed us, and rocked us to sleep, played and sang, and it was good to us. Very good, sure.
Tell me about the nursery.
The nursery? The nursery, ah.
It was completely automatic?
Completely automatic. There were crystalline walls that wavered from 2 to 3 dimensions. There were pseudo-textured floors that shifted from brick to dirt to waving grass. The nursery was the best, but then we wanted the best for the children. Doctor, I must be crazy. We have no children.
What about Peter and Wendy? They're your children.
Oh, no. We have no children, Doctor. We have no children.
All right, Miss Carver. To continue. After 3 sessions, the subject was able to recall and accept the idea that he had 2 children. He described the first day.
All right, Peter and Wendy. This is your nursery.
What's so special about a nursery, Dad?
Plenty. Just go in and see.
Do we have to?
You'll be surprised.
Gee.
Go ahead.
I'm scared. I'm not. Hey, it's nice in here. It is? Come on in, Wendy. Boy, look at the pictures on the walls. They're real.
They're almost real. You can change them any way you like, just by thinking about it.
Go on in, dear.
Well, all right, Mommy. Hey, Wendy, look what I can do with the pictures. That's the White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. Sure. I just thought about it, and there it was. Let me try. Peter, let me try. Well, go ahead. Just think. How about Wizard in Oz? I want to see Wizard in Oz.
Well, dear, there we are.
Oh, they like it, don't they?
Why shouldn't they? All I have to do is think, and they've got whatever they want in 3 dimensions. Color, sound, and smell.
Oh, it's nice that we can give them all the advantages.
Sure. What else are we working for, huh?
Mm.
Well, what do you want to do this evening?
Well, the Petersons asked us over for bridge, but if you...
we don't have to worry about the kids. They'll be all right in the nursery. Come on, Lydia. We deserve a night out.
And in the nursery, the walls were a kaleidoscope of time and space and imagination. The green forest of Sherwood and the quiet forms of Robin and his merry men gave way to the roll of the high seas and the smell of salt in the air as Sir Henry Morgan sailed into the harbor at Jamaica. And behind the crystalline quartz walls, the vacuum tubes and grids and banks of metal image tape spun quietly and efficiently, erasing the line between illusion and reality. Of course, the electric bill from Consolidated Utilities was tremendous, but it was worth it. The happy life home breathed contentedly as life proceeded with soft automaticity as guaranteed in the brochure and bill of sale.
George.
Hmm?
George, I wish you'd look at the nursery.
What's wrong with it?
I don't know.
I was in the nursery last week. It's perfectly all right.
It's different now.
What do you mean, different?
I want you to come and see.
Are the kids there?
No. Madge Allen took them to a show along with her kids. That's why I want you to look at it now, before they get back.
Oh, all right. But what you expect me to do, I don't know. I'm no mechanic.
This isn't a question of a leaky faucet, George.
All right, dear. I'm coming.
The nursery light flicked on as they came down the hall. The relays clicked and the tubes warmed and chemical odor banks and pipes bubbled into life as they paused before the closed door.
Go ahead, George. Open it.
On all sides, in 3 dimensions, stretched the hot, tired landscapes of an African veldt reproduced to the last stick and pebble and bit of straw. The ceiling above them became a sky with a hot yellow sun. A wind blew in from the baked veldtland. The hot straw smell of lion grass. The cool green smell of the hidden waterhole. The great rusty smell of animals. The howl of the jackal in the distance. And the papery rustling of the great vultures that wheeled and circled under the yellow burning sun.
Let's get out of this sun. It's a little too real.
Oh, George, you promised you'd look around.
Well, I don't see anything.
Wait a minute. There are the vultures.
Filthy creatures.
There are the lions. Far over that way.
Yes, I see them.
Oh, they're on their way to the water hole. They've just eaten.
It's some animal. A zebra or a baby giraffe, maybe.
Can you see it? Are you sure?
It's a little late to be sure. Nothing over there but clean bone and the vultures swooping down for what's left.
Did you hear that scream?
What scream?
About a moment ago?
Sorry, no.
Oh, here come the lions. George, they're frightening.
Take it easy, Lydia. They're just illusion.
The lions were 15 feet away. So real, so startlingly real, you could feel the prickling fur on your hand, and your mouth was stuffed with the dusty upholstery smell of their heated pelts. And the yellow of them was in your eyes like the yellow of an exquisite tapestry. The yellows of lions and summer grass, and the sound of the matted lion lungs exhaling on the silent noontide, and the smell of meat from the panting, dripping mouth.
George, I'm afraid they're so real.
They're only an illusion, Lydia, that's all.
Watch out! Ah!
Out, quick, outside!
They almost got us.
Now, take it easy. Calm down.
I could feel their breath.
Get a hold of yourself, Lydia. They aren't real. Walls, that's all it is. Crystalloid walls.
They look so real.
Of course they do. But it's all dimensional color reactionary process, a mental tape film behind glass screens. It's all odorophonics and sonics. Now, here, take my handkerchief.
I'm afraid. Did you see? Did you feel it? It's too real.
Now, Lydia.
And we've got to tell Wendy and Peter not to read any more on Africa.
Of course, dear.
I want you to lock that place up.
But you know how difficult Peter is about that. I punished him last week by locking the nursery for an afternoon, and he threw a tantrum. And Wendy, too. Well, they live for the nursery.
It's got to be locked. That's all there is to it.
You've been working too hard, Lydia. You need a rest.
I don't know. Maybe I don't have enough to do. I have too much time to think. All I do is set the menu selector dials at the beginning of the week.
But that's the whole idea. The house is automatic.
I know, but couldn't we turn it off for about a week and take a vacation?
You mean you want to fry eggs for me?
And darn socks. I feel like I don't belong here. The house is wife and mother and maid. How can I compete with the African velts? George, those lions can't get out of there, can they?
Of course not, dear. Now, don't think about it anymore.
They ate alone. He sat idly watching the dining room table produce warm dishes of food from its mechanical interior.
You forgot the ketchup. That's better.
It wouldn't hurt to lock the children out of the nursery for a while. It was clear that they had been spending too much time in Africa. That sun, he could feel it on his neck still like a hot paw. And the lions and the smell of blood. Remarkable how the nursery caught the telepathic emanations of the children's minds and created a life to fulfill their desires. The children thought zebras, and there were zebras. Sun, sun. Giraffes, giraffes. Death, and death. They were so young. But long before you knew what death was, you were wishing it on someone else. But this, the long, hot African veldt, the awful death in the jaws of a lion, and repeated again and again and again. The children came home dutifully at 8:30.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Pop.
Hello, darlings. Do you want something to eat, dear? We're just having dessert.
We're full of strawberry ice cream. And hot dogs. We'll just sit and watch.
Sure. Peter, tell us about the nursery.
The nursery?
All about Africa and everything.
I don't understand.
Well, your mother and I were just traveling through Africa with rod and reel.
There's no Africa in the nursery.
Oh, come now, Peter. We know better.
I don't remember any Africa. Do you, Win? and see, huh?
Sure, I'll be right back.
Wendy, come back here. Wendy!
Oh, she'll be right back, Pop.
She doesn't have to. I've seen it. Come on.
Sure, Pop, but Wendy'll tell us.
Open the door.
See, Daddy? It's not Africa. It's Florida. Like in Bambi.
There go the deer. See? It isn't Africa.
I see it isn't. Go to bed.
But it isn't 9 o'clock.
You heard me. Go to bed.
Okay. Good night, Mom. Good night, Pop.
Good night.
Good night, dear. I'll be right in.
Wait a minute, Lydia. Look at this.
What is it?
This is the corner where the lions were, isn't it?
What is that you picked up?
An old wallet of mine. There's a smell of hot grass on it. And the smell of a lion. It's wet with saliva. And it's been chewed.
George, those smears of blood.
Come on out. Now let's go to bed.
But in the middle of the night, he was still awake, and he knew his wife was awake.
George, how did your wallet get in the nursery?
I don't know. Wendy must have changed the walls from the African veldt. I'm going to keep it locked. Maybe it isn't good for the children. My father used to say children are like carpets. They should be stepped on occasionally. We've never lifted a hand. They're spoiled and we're spoiled. I think I'll have Dr. McLean come tomorrow morning and have a look at Africa.
But it isn't Africa now. It's Florida and Bambi.
I have a feeling it'll be Africa again before then.
Although their automatic Somno beds tried very hard, the two adults could not be rocked to sleep for another hour. A smell of cats was in the night air. And in the morning, the stove cooked French toast, and the dining room table poured the syrup and melted butter.
Pop,
Yes?
you aren't going to lock up the nursery for good, are you?
That all depends.
On what?
On you and your sister.
We feel you should have some variety, dear.
I wouldn't want the nursery locked up ever.
Well, as a matter of fact, we're thinking of turning the whole house off for about a month. Sort of camping out.
Be fun for a change. Now, don't you think so, Wendy?
No, it'd be awful.
I don't want to do anything but look and listen and smell. What else is there to do?
Oh, all right, all right. Go play in Africa.
Are you going to shut off the house soon?
We're considering it.
I don't think you better consider it any more, Pop.
I won't have any threats from you, son.
Okay, Pop. Come on, Wendy. Let's get back.
After breakfast, Dr. David McLean arrived.
Oh, I saw the nursery last year, George. It looked all right to me.
You didn't notice anything unusual?
No. The pattern showed the usual violence, a tendency towards slight paranoia. All children feel persecuted by their parents. It's perfectly normal.
There it is.
Suppose we take a look at it now.
They entered without knocking and sent the children out. The screams had faded and the lions were feeding quietly under the trees.
I wish I could see what they're eating.
How long has this been going on?
A little over a month.
Certainly doesn't feel good.
I don't want feelings. I want facts.
George, a psychologist never saw a fact in his life. He knows about feelings. And this doesn't feel good. Now, my advice to you is to have the whole room torn down and your children brought to me every day for the next year for treatment.
Is it that bad?
I'm afraid so. You know, that's why the nursery was developed originally, to let us examine the patterns left on the wall by a child's mind.
But what is it? What's wrong with Peter and Wendy?
Well, it's hard to say.
I haven't punished them more than average. Oh, I took away a few gadgets. Last week, I locked the nursery to show I meant business.
You've let this room replace you and your wife in your children's affections. This room is their real father and mother, and now you come along and want to shut it. Well, you can feel the hatred coming out of that sky. George, turn everything off. The nursery, the automatic kitchen, the whole automatic house. Start now.
But won't the shock be too much for the children?
I don't want them going any deeper. Let's get out of here. I never like these rooms. They get me nervous.
Those lions look real, don't they? I don't suppose there's any way...
What?
That they could become real.
Not that I know.
Some flaw in the machinery, tampering?
No.
I don't imagine the room will like being turned off.
Nothing ever likes to die, even a room.
I wonder if it hates me for turning it off.
Paranoia is thick today. Well, hello. Is this your scarf? It's stained. Brown. Blood.
That's Lydia's. Come on, the main fuse box is out here.
Right, go ahead. Pull the switch.
Yeah. It's off.
The two children were in hysterics. They screamed and kicked and threw things. They yelled and sobbed and swore and jumped on the furniture, weeping.
It's off and it stays off. The whole house dies as of now.
He marched around the house, cutting switches and pulling fuses.
Don't let them do it. Don't let Pop kill everything. I hate you. I hate you.
Insults won't get you anywhere.
I wish you were dead.
We were for a long while. Now we're going to start really living. Instead of being handled and massaged, we're going to live.
Once more, Daddy. Just once more. One more minute of the nursery, that's all. Just one more minute.
Oh, George, it can't hurt, really.
Oh, all right, only shut up. 1 minute, and that's the end. Forever.
Gee, thanks, Pop. Thanks.
And then we're going on a vacation. Dr. McLean is coming in half an hour to help us out. Lydia, turn on the nursery for just a minute.
Oh, boy. Come on, Wendy. Come on. Thanks, Daddy. Thanks a lot.
Just 1 minute, remember? Now, where'd I put those suitcases? Lydia!
Don't shout, George. I'm right here.
Did you leave them alone in the nursery?
Well, I've got to get ready, George.
Well, I guess we better get them out of there before they get involved with those beasts again.
Pop! Pop, come here! Daddy! Mommy!
Come on, quick.
Wendy! Peter! What's the matter?
Hurry up. Open the nursery. Wendy! Peter!
They aren't anywhere. Wendy? Peter?
Peter! The door. Open the door. They've locked it from the outside. Peter!
Peter! Wendy! Peter! Open the door, dear!
Let us out, Peter! Open the door. It's time to go. Open the door!
George! The lions!
Peter, do you hear me? Open this door!
They're all around us, George!
Son! Son, do you hear me? Let us out! Son!
George! Look out! The lions! They're coming!
When Dr. David McLean came, half hour later, he found the two children in the nursery sitting in the center of the open glade eating a picnic lunch. Beyond them was the waterhole and the yellow veldland. Above was the hot sun. At a distance, Dr. McLean saw the lions fighting and clawing and then settling down to feed in silence under the shady trees.
Hi, kids. Where are your mom and dad?
Oh, they'll be here directly.
Good. We've got to get along.
He squinted at the lions with his hands up to his eyes. Now they were done feeding, and they moved to the waterhole to drink. A shadow flickered as the vultures dropped down from the blazing sky to finish what the lions left.
Dr. McLean? Dr. McLean?
Huh? What?
Have a cup of tea?
Which concludes my report to date. There were no lions, of course. Not in a physical sense. Lydia and George were devoured, however, almost as surely as if there had been lions. Their personalities were devoured by the mechanistic marvels which had usurped their role as parents. All 4 members of the family are under intensive therapy now and are doing as well as can be expected. Send that by telerope, Miss Carver. Oh, and would you ask George Abbott to step inside? I'm ready for him now.
You have just heard X-1, presented by the National Broadcasting Company in cooperation with Street and Smith, publishers of astounding science fiction. Tonight, by transcription, X-1 has brought you The Veldt, written by Ray Bradbury and adapted for radio by Ernest Kenoy. Featured in the cast were Mary Patton, Bill Quinn, David Pfeffer, Beverly Lunsford, Charles Penman, and John Larkin. Your announcer, Fred Collin. X-1 was directed by Dan Sutter and is an NBC Radio Network production.
An intriguing story, predicting the perils of letting your children spending too much time online, written 50 years before the internet was even a thing. That Ray Bradbury knew his stuff. There you go, episode 1 out of the way, only a few hundred to go. That's the way I look at it anyway, keep a positive mind. That's what's kept me going all this time I've been out here. Sure, I'm a long way from Earth, but I'm on my way back to Earth, and that's the important thing. Unfortunately, by the time I get there, there's a chance either the entire thing will have been demolished by people wearing ties, or it'll be so hot I might be better off stopping at Mars. Or the Moon, which, as we know, is a part of Mars. Next episode, we'll be looking at another Jack Arnold film, probably one of the most well-known science fiction films of all time, and, spoiler alert, it's a cracker. So don't miss out. Subscribe to this podcast using your podcatcher of choice, or you can listen on YouTube too, because we've started a YouTube channel on which, where possible, we'll be uploading interesting little films for you to watch. Take care, don't let the Bastarians grind you down, and we'll speak on my next broadcast. Until then, this is Dan Gale, lone occupant of Her Majesty's Space Capsule X-1, signing off.
Communicate with us on Twitter at ItWatched, or send us a message at itwatchfromouterspace.com. End of transmission. Keep washing your skis.